Well, good morning, youth. Today, we're going to start looking at The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first book in the Narnia series. No matter what other later editions might try to reorder it, this is the first one. But I want us to start this week out like we have other weeks, thinking about a Bible story. And the one I want us to think about this week in particular is Acts chapter 26. Now, we're not going to read the whole chapter. It's a long one. But go read that and use that in your devotions this week. So in that chapter, Paul is giving his defense before King Agrippa. See, he's been accused of stirring up trouble amongst the Jews. And so he has to give his defense. And his defense is not exactly what we might think of as a good defense, but it really makes sense when you think about it. Because Paul's defense to Agrippa is basically, well, the Jews are accusing me of stirring up trouble and simply wanting to cause chaos among them. So let me tell you, King Agrippa, about me. All the Jews know that I was raised a Jew, and when I was young, I was destined to be a Jewish leader. I was the most committed Jew of all time. And then one day, Jesus met me on the road. The Jesus that I was trying to prove dead, the Jesus that I was trying to arrest his followers, he met me on the road and he changed me. Now I do go around sharing the good news, which is what upsets the Jews. So King Agrippa, there are really two possibilities here. Either this change that I had is a real change of heart because I had a real encounter with Jesus, or all of a sudden, when I was at the top of my career goals as a Jewish leader, I just became crazy and started opposing the Jews and causing trouble. So, which of those stories is most plausible? That's basically what Paul is bringing before Agrippa. Choose between these two stories, Agrippa. Which one of those is most plausible? In one story, Paul is the most committed Jew, but then somewhere along the line he became crazy and just decided to go against the Jews completely. In another story, he's a man who was once one of the most committed Jews, but then he had an encounter with Jesus that changed his life. Which is more plausible? That he all of a sudden just changed his ways and became insane? Or that he actually really did have an encounter with Jesus and what he's teaching is true? You know, in this book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we have a similar kind of choice between two stories. The Pevensie children, Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, make it into Narnia, and they immediately start to hear about two stories about this new world of Narnia. Is Narnia really the realm of the White Witch? Is she the rightful ruler? Or is Narnia the realm of Aslan? And did the queen try to steal it from him, the White Witch steal it from him? For example, all four children make it into Narnia for the first time. I forget which chapter it's in, but later on in the book. And they find that Mr. Tumnus, who's the faun who had befriended Lucy when she had first entered Narnia, Mr. Tumnus has been taken away by the witch. And they don't know what to do. Then they start to follow a bird that's close by, and the bird keeps leading them on. And so they think, well, we might as well follow this bird. But before they get too far, Edmund whispers to Peter, he says, if it comes to that is which side they should be on, he says, which is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are in the right and that the queen, yes, I know we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong? We really don't know anything about either. You see, they're trying to figure out which story they can trust. Which story can they trust? How do we know which story is right? Is it the queen? Is it Aslan? It's kind of like Paul's defense with Agrippa. And as the book goes on, one of the stories becomes supremely plausible and worth trusting and following. That's Aslan's story. And youth, Lewis is really teaching us here something about the grand story of our universe and how we come to trust it. Remember how we talked about in the first week of our studies of Narnia, how there are many competing stories, many competing metanarratives, many stories that try to explain how our world is and why it's the way it is. There's the Christian story, the modernist story, the postmodern story, and many others. How do we know which of those stories is real and true? How do we know which one we should follow? Lewis is trying to show us how we need to think about those stories through how the Pevensie children have to learn and figure out which story about Narnia is correct. So let's think about them, and then in the next lesson we'll think about how we do that. So how do they come to believe that Aslan's story is the correct story in the Narnia stories? How do they do it? How do they come to believe that and come to realize that the witch's story is really an enchantment meant to hold them in captivity? It's not just a guess, but it's also not something so obvious that they could just never miss it. To begin with, they have the testimony of Mr. Tumnus and the beavers. These animals know that the witch is not really the ruler of Narnia, and they are so kind to the Pevensie children. That kindness brings the Pevensie children to trust them. But of course, that alone is not enough to prove that their story is correct. They also have to look at the evidence around them. In the witch's story, the world around them is locked in winter. It's always winter and never Christmas. That's a repeated line in the book. In her story, the world is cold, dull, dreary place with no joy, no purpose, no meaning to life. All there is survival in the witch's story. That's it. But in Aslan's story, it's quite different. He offers a story with joy, with purpose, with meaning. Why? And so which of those stories makes sense of their deepest longings, their desires? They want there to be Christmas because Christmas is something that brings joy to an otherwise cold and dreary winter. They want there to be spring. They want their lives to have purpose beyond just survival in the cold. Aslan's story makes sense of those desires, and he brings them joy. He brings them spring. He brings them a purpose for living. The witch's story doesn't make sense of those desires. Another thing to think about is Aslan's story makes sense of their experiences in their life in Narnia. Could the animals in Narnia really just be merely slaves of the witch's system? Is that the only reason they exist? That doesn't seem right. Or why do the treats of the witch, like the Turkish delight, only enslave and then they spoil other good food? But the Aslan's gifts make them strong. Aslan's gifts give them courage. Aslan's gifts help them to help people. Why is that the case? Because Aslan's story is true. In the witch's story, there's no grace and there's no rest. She just drives people to do her will, like she continues to drive Edmund on through the snow and through the woods without any rest. In the witch's story, everyone has to save themselves. But in Aslan's story, Aslan does the saving. Do any of these things by themselves prove the witch's story wrong? No. But these 5 things together show the children that Aslan's story is so much more plausible. It's the kind of story they want to be a part of. It's the kind of story they want to trust. And on Wednesday, we're going to look at how we come to choose which story is really plausible in real life in kind of a similar way, with similar evidence. We'll take a look at that on Wednesday. In the meantime, you guys think about that from the book and go ahead and start reading the book. It'd be good for you to do it.